have you ever wondered what it takes to be a successful CEO? Well, today's guest on Let's Shape the Future can tell you exactly that. I'm thrilled to be joined by Dane Holewinski, former CEO and VC-backed founder, who is now a startup CEO coach and founder of Decode. Thank you, Dane, for taking the time to chat with me today.
It's my pleasure.
Thanks. So with all of my guests, I like to go back to the very start of their careers. So where did it all begin for you?
So in university, I studied finance and entrepreneurship and psychology, but out of school, went into strategy consulting, one of the big strategy consulting companies where as a very young professional, I was working with kind of C-level executives at Fortune 100, Fortune 500 companies. And I spent a number of years there out of Boston in South Africa, really just drinking from the fire hose, really being thrown into conversations and situations and strategy discussions that, looking back, I'm not sure that I had any real qualifications to be a part of. But I guess similarly to the way that founders and entrepreneurs dive into the deep end and learn through doing, spent that time really learning a lot about how businesses and organizations operate, the impact of leadership on the way that teams work, and a variety of other kind of business and life skills. And at some point in that journey, after about 3 or 4 years, I realized that I felt like I had learned a lot about what it took to build and grow a successful business. And I was now learning how to be a really good consultant. And I realized that as I looked forward and looked at those people who had chosen that as a career, it really wasn't the life that I wanted. And so there was a moment where I kind of realized that I was toward the end of my journey as a consultant and was looking for what was next. And as I've done a couple of times in my life, I took about a year off. I kind of ended, kind of gracefully exited that consulting engagement, which seemed like a very crazy thing to do for the people that knew me, for my family, for my parents. I was on a really beautiful kind of standard trajectory of life, but I knew it wasn't for me. So it took about a year off. I am and was a very big kiteboarder, so I was kite surfing. I wrote a novel during that time, which is something that I was feeling inspired to do. I traveled a bit, and really was just kind of feeling into what was next for me, while also just taking some time to kind of express myself and enjoy life.
Do you like, if people have the sort of opportunity and the funds and that sort of time to do that sort of thing, do you think that's like a really good process for someone to go through if they're maybe not sure that what they're doing at the moment is what they want to do for the rest of their life?
I think, it's obviously a privileged thing to be able to do. But I was fortunate enough to have, had some success and saved up some money. So I think it's an amazing, taking some time, taking a pause, however long that can be, I think is one of the best ways that we can gain perspective. And I'm also one who deeply believes that by kind of going inward and getting to know ourselves and listening to ourselves with less distraction, with less busyness, is a great way to kind of connect to success in a broader context, not just, hey, how do I live this external definition of success, or how do I make the most money or achieve the next step in my career? But what do I truly want for my life? And there's nothing quite like taking some time, taking some space, reflecting, traveling, going inward to help clarify those things.
It sounds like some of those tips there is what we'll probably come on to later in terms of what you talk to C-level execs about. So moving on to that sort of stuff. So for those that aren't aware, did you want to provide some background as to who Decode are, what you do, and what your role in the business entails?
Sure. Decode is a coaching company based out of kind of the Silicon Valley, San Francisco Bay Area. And we partner with startup founders and CEOs to help them navigate the intense pressure, opportunity, excitement, challenges of scaling a rapidly growing business. We typically start working with companies kind of in the early stages. They've raised kind of a significant amount of funding, but are still very early, and help that founder, CEO make this transition from early stage founder where they're involved in everything to a true CEO that's building a scalable brand or business.
So to that point, do you tend to go searching for clients, or do you find that the sort of C-level execs tend to come to you first? How does that sort of relationship normally start?
Most of the clients that come to me come through a referral from either a previous client or maybe a VC that has invested in a previous client that was able to witness the work that we've done and the impact on the CEO. So I'm fortunate enough to have many people come to me, and I only work with a relatively small number of people at a time. So the need for people coming to me is not massive, and so I tend to have more people coming than I need.
Oh, nice. So on a day-to-day basis, what does a CEO coach's job and role look like? And what made you want to turn from being a founder yourself to then sort of coaching others?
Yeah, I'll break those two questions. I'll answer those separately. So kind of fast forwarding in my career after consulting, I eventually came out to Silicon Valley and worked in startups. And I was first an exec, an operator, kind of running most non-technical business functions over a number of years, and then eventually became a founder. And so kind of jumped into that myself. And in my last company that I had founded, I had a coach for the first time, and it was a massively transformational experience. And so when I exited that business, I again took some time to really go inward and reflect and decide what was next for me. I oriented on wanting everything I do for the rest of my life to be connected to both purpose and passion. That was what I knew. I didn't know what else that was going to mean. And in taking this time off where I kind of went deeply inward, it became clear to me that my work in the world was to coach startup founders and CEOs, people that were like me, were looking for someone like me, couldn't actually find someone with the operating experience as well as experience coaching. That was something that I was really looking for as a founder looking for a coach. And I felt just a deep connection to this work. And so I made that transition. That was probably about 6 years ago. And I think your second question was, what is that day to day? What does it actually look like for me? It's most of the work that we do is through conversation. So whether that is having Zoom conversations with clients, especially now, most everything has shifted to Zoom. And so a combination of live Zoom sessions with clients where we're exploring whatever is most present for them, where I can be a support, I can be a accountability partner, a thought partner, a challenger, a coach. And then I do a bunch of prep work in order to prepare myself for those conversations and for that engagement in that journey that we're on together. So sometimes I'm running 360s and consolidating those. Sometimes I'm reading board decks or other company materials. I do my own mindfulness, meditation, breathwork practices, both to show up as my best self and also sharing that with clients, and a variety of other things that support startup CEOs, founders to be their best selves, the best leaders for their companies.
Quite varied then on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, very, very varied.
It's funny. So I was having a look through your profile, and obviously you've got a lot of testimonials from different C-level executives, and there was one that sort of struck out to me, and the quote reads that, "When my COO and I started working with Dane, our relationship was in a challenging phase. Working with Dane, we were supported in having productive, hard conversations, align on a common vision, and build the communication skills necessary to operate as partners." So the question I'm sort of taking from that quote is, does your role as a CEO coach sometimes have similar characteristics to like a counselor or a therapist between stakeholders, as weird as that sounds?
Yeah, it's a great question and a common question. So there is overlap, right? If you thought of what a therapist might do, what does a coach do? There's a Venn diagram where there's overlap. I would say that there's a couple of distinctions that I would highlight. One is the work that we do, the work that I do with clients as a coach is particularly goal-oriented. Right? So we're always starting with like, what are your goals? Where do you want to go? What's the vision for your business, for your life? And how do we get there? And so when we go into relationships, when we go into our history or our past, our fears, our relationship with our parents, whatever we need to explore, it's always in the service of getting somewhere that you want to go. And that exploration is the natural outcome of taking the steps toward that goal and finding that there's something that's blocking it or that's in the way that needs to shift, that needs to unlock.
Yeah, so it's funny because as you say there, when I originally was prepping for this, I didn't expect to have those sorts of questions in terms of how it, like I was thinking this is going to be all business, but if anything, there's a lot of it that's not business related at all. It's about the connection between the individuals within the business and how they work together. And as you say, turning up as your best self and that sort of stuff. So to that sort of leads me on to my next question, which is quite an open question, but kind of a big one. So can anyone be a successful CEO?
Well, I think it's a yes and a no, right?
Okay.
So I think there's a set of there's sort of a set of skills or mindset that's required, I think, to be a great CEO. And I think there's just like particular personalities and goals. Like if you don't want to be a CEO, right? You don't want to build a great company or business or organization, it's not a good idea to try because it's a really hard thing to do. And you're going to come up against every fear and every challenge and every edge. And if there's not something that is inspiring you or motivating you that's bigger than the moment, you're not going to be particularly satisfied, right? And you may want to get off that ship as it's sailing. But I think what's even more interesting is what are those characteristics that I probably have seen and having worked with dozens and dozens of CEOs, like what are those characteristics that I think are common that lead to someone both being successful, and I think of success always in a broader term than just like, hey, I was successful in building this business. It's also feeling fulfilled in that process and feeling not every moment, but generally feeling very satisfied with the choice to go be a CEO and to go build a business, to go work toward a vision. And a couple that I like to highlight. One, I think it's really critical to have curiosity. I think curiosity, if I was going to identify one characteristic that is critical to be successful, it's curiosity. A few others, growth mindset and ownership mindset. These are like three legs of the stool at a very like mindset foundational level that I think are really critical, really for all humans, for all leaders, and certainly for entrepreneurs and CEOs.
And do you find that the personality traits differ between different C-level executives? So what a CFO might need might be, obviously the personality is going to be completely different to a chief marketing officer, for example.
There are differences for sure. I think each functional area tends to attract certain types of people that work well for what's needed. I do most of my work with CEOs, founder CEOs. As you know, I have worked with Chris, who was on your podcast before, who's CMO of Tonal, as well as Ali, who's the CEO. But I typically am working with CEOs and founders. So I have less breadth of experience in like a bunch of CFOs and a bunch of CMOs, and I have worked with a few, chief product officers, but tend to be founders who then move into a role often. And so while I do think there are differences in different C-level executives and who's attracted to those roles and who will be successful, I'd say it's not my particular area of expertise.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And obviously, where you've got so much experience with CEOs, have you found over the course of your career that the sort of profile of a successful CEO has changed over time? Like, does a CEO now have some priorities that maybe they wouldn't have had 10, 20 years ago, for example?
I've really been focused as a coach in this work for the past, 6 years or so. And so I think over that time period, there have been some shifts. There's been some macro and cultural shifts. There's been some shifts in just how work is being done right now, for sure, particularly over the last couple of years. But I don't think there's been fundamental changes in like the raw characteristics that are required to be a successful entrepreneur.
I think, as you said earlier, with the sort of the growth mindset, the ownership mindset, the curiosity, they're not things that are going to change. If you had them 10 years ago, do you know what I mean? You're going to need them now to be successful in the role that you've got. So to that point, obviously, as employees, we're drummed into us that it's so important to have like a structured development plan with goals and milestones to achieve. How important is it for CEOs and other executives to do the same? Do they do the same? And is that an important exercise for them?
I think it's an absolutely critical exercise in the same way it is for any employee or any human that wants to be their best, who wants to grow. I think I'm fortunate in that the CEOs and founders that I work with are those that are really committed to doing that. That's why we're working together. And the way I like to orient to that question is particularly for founder CEOs of kind of fast growing early stage companies. I tend to work with venture backed entrepreneurs. And so when you have success in that sort of business, the growth is incredibly rapid. The growth of the team, the growth of the business can just be phenomenal. And the reality is the role changes every 6 to 12 months. And so it's really not good enough as a startup CEO to just be good at your job today. Even if you're perfectly qualified to do what you're doing now, you need to always be looking forward, just like you need to be looking forward for the business of who's the leader that this business needs 6 months from now, 12 months from now. Where are there gaps in my skill set or the way that I'm operating today versus where I need to be? And how do I basically fill those gaps before the company needs them, so that I'm not slowing down the trajectory of the business with my own growth, or I don't get to a point where I've hit my ceiling and the board or the business needs to choose to potentially bring in a more experienced CEO because the founder CEO wasn't able to grow fast enough for the business, which again, sometimes that's a choice a founder CEO will make because they see the potential for the business and they see that maybe someone else could do a better job of realizing that. But we always want to make that be the choice of the founder as opposed to the choice of a board or kind of forced from the outside.
And as you say, these startups, especially at the stages that you interact with them, they're going through hypergrowth. Like as you say, they're just on that exponential curve. And the sort of point I'm taking from there is a CEO has to be at their best for the business to run at its best. And you mentioned earlier about how you have things like mindfulness and meditation and stuff. Is that something you encourage CEOs to resonate with, and are those sorts of exercises part of the coaching that you do with them, as well as the business side topics?
100%. So I take a very holistic approach, you could call it, to coaching. I actually think it's counterproductive to separate the professional from the personal, particularly for an entrepreneur, a founder, because as they know, the work is so intertwined. They're like birthing something, right? And so to separate their personal from the professional doesn't really make sense. Anything that happens outside of work is going to impact how they show up at work. Anything that's happening at work is going to impact them outside of work. And so it's really about unleashing the full potential of the whole human, right? Who is a leader, who is a CEO. And if you skip that, it doesn't really work. Managing stress, managing mindset, being able to show up in hard conversations, like it requires practice in order to do that. And so one of the things I always work with my clients on and highly encourage is creating these foundational practices that they're doing daily, weekly, monthly, that help them perform at their best. And some of those things were, meditation is an incredibly powerful tool. Breathwork, I'm a breathwork facilitator and bring in breathwork, which can really help to shift states, to unlock insights, not just from the mind, but through the emotional and physical intelligence that we also carry. It could be journaling. There's a variety of practices. And I really work with each client to customize those things that feel best for them and that work for them. Exercise, like these are all, we got to take care of our body, our mind, our emotions, our mindset, in order to show up as a great leader before we even get to how do you manage people? How do you inspire people? How do you build a great company?
Do you find that sometimes people are hesitant to try those things like meditation or those sorts of things? As sometimes there's a bit of a perception around meditation and like whether or not it actually works. And obviously there's so many advocates for it, but do you find that some people are a bit hesitant to sort of adopt those processes at first?
I think people fall on a spectrum based on their familiarity with the practices. I approach everything with clients as an experiment. And so the nice thing is people that I think are attracted to being founders and entrepreneurs are usually pretty open-minded and resonate with like, well, let's just try it and see. And so that's the mode I come with just about everything that we do is, hey, there's a lot of people that say meditation has transformational impact on the way you're able to show up as a human and as a leader. You may or may not know if that's true, but would it be worth a 2-week experiment to like, let's meditate for 10 minutes a day and just see how you feel after 2 weeks or after a week? And that's how we approach things. And then with that experiment, we learn, we grow, we shift, we take in the learnings, we throw out the stuff that's not working, and we continue to iterate.
I think it's a good point you made there. It's a lot of the startups that I've spoken to, and it's quite a common thing, as you say, within them is even within their product and their sort of business, it's let's try it and see. It's always because they are a disruptor, they're in a disruptive industry. So it makes sense for that to translate into their personal life as well, because if they say, oh, let's just try it, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work, but it can have a monumental impact on them. So what are some of the sort of common topics that C-level execs will come to you with a need for advice?
I like to break down the topics into a few kind of buckets. So one bucket is what I call like management skills, right? How do I manage and get the best out of the people that are working directly for me? How do I communicate? How do I give feedback? How do I hold people accountable? How do I delegate? Those sorts of things. The second bucket I differentiate as sort of like leadership. How do I communicate a vision, a strategy? How do I inspire the team? How do I create culture? How do I communicate values? How do I do that both internally as well as externally? Leadership type topics. There's what I call like managing, let's say, the energy system, right? Like, how do I manage my stress? How do I manage my energy to make sure I'm showing up at my best? How do I get into flow state? How do I kind of show up every day in a way that serves the business? So that's, I consider it all kind of like, in some ways, managing mindset, energy, physical aspects of this really hard work. And then the final bucket, I kind of bucket as interpersonal or interrelational. So this is where, leading is about relating. So you're relating with individuals, you're relating with teams, you're relating with investors, you're relating with board members. So there are a series of relationships that exist, and someone's ability to productively and positively manage relationships enables them to raise funding and manage their board and get them on board and manage a team and inspire them. And so this interpersonal, interrelational, emotional intelligence aspect of being a great leader and CEO and founder is the fourth bucket.
So when you put it like that, you don't I didn't realize that there was such a breadth of things that these sorts of people have to think about in terms of running their organization. But do you find that sometimes when they address one of the buckets or one part within a bucket, they then realize that maybe their personality doesn't suit that part of the role, so therefore they then find areas that they then delegate to someone who's better at it than they are, for example?
Yeah, I think there's a small number of things, let's using the CEO as the example, that like the CEO kind of has to do. And then there's a lot of things that, especially as the business grows, they actually don't have to do. And so I do think identifying what strengths you have, right? What you enjoy, what you're great at, like what value you can uniquely add, and identify what those things are, and find out those other areas where it isn't energizing, you're not as good at, there are other people that are better at, and building the right team, right? Or set of humans around yourself and around the business is really critical. And particularly as you think about a business scaling, it very quickly moves from, hey, I've got to know everything, be involved in everything, and I'm the best person to make almost every decision within this business, maybe outside of the technical stuff if you're not technical, to I need to surround myself with people that are better than me at every area that they're responsible for. And I need to learn how to lead and manage a group of people with way more experience, way more depth of knowledge in all of these different functional areas, and get the most out of them. And that's just a very, very different job, right? So if you think about that journey from one end of that spectrum to the other end of that spectrum, there's a lot that needs to shift in order to do those things well.
Yeah, no, it's a great point, because as you say, it's like they're sort of giving away pieces of their baby. Basically, they've nurtured this thing to an amazing level, and now it's to the point where they can't do everything themselves, otherwise the business won't grow. And that's probably quite a tough thing for them to accept. Obviously, it's probably quite exciting in the same respect, but I can imagine they're normally quite nervous, or it depends on the personality, but I can imagine it can be quite nervous to give up part of it, because it's sort of that I feel like I could maybe do it better myself because I've done it so well so far. But it's important to then realize that there are people that can do it as good, if not better, than maybe you can. And it's important to bring those in. Otherwise, the business will never really, really grow.
100%. And it is a challenge that often at some point we'll work with, right? This ability to delegate, but really to trust others and to be comfortable sometimes knowing that people might do it differently than you would do it. That doesn't mean that you should do it. They may do it only 80% as well as you would do it. That still doesn't mean that you should do it, right? These are some of the questions that come up because, as you mentioned, as you're scaling, one person only has so much time, only has so much energy that they can focus, and actually determining what those areas are to focus on, how to prioritize your time, your energy, is one of the most critical skills in scaling as a founder CEO.
And that sort of moves me on to my next point. Obviously, we've spoken a lot about what makes a CEO successful, but what, in your opinion, sort of the key things that make a startup in general successful? Does a lot of it come from having successful, or the leaders that are turning up as their best selves that will then encourage the startup to be as successful as possible?
I think it's a critical factor. It's a necessary but not sufficient condition, so to speak. So I do think that the founders have an inordinate impact on the business, the culture, the team. And so really starting from that place and really working with founders and CEOs, because whatever strengths and weaknesses they have, like, reverberates down through the whole business often.
Yeah,
and so if they can show up as their best self, if they can show up with without massive blind spots, having worked through some of their fears or the edges or issues that naturally arise for all of us, and they do that work and can, like, shift some of those maybe more destructive patterns or patterns that can have negative consequences to a team, that's a great starting point. But there's just an investment in finding amazing people, in creating great teamwork within the team, at building an amazing culture that encourages, creativity and experimentation and learning and curiosity and growth, is really critical. Having a vision, having a mission, having values, things that unite the team toward a common end. That's just a few of the things that are really critical for the whole organization to be successful. And this is all sort of like sitting on a foundation of, we could call it product market fit, a term that is very popular, which is, hey, there's a problem in the world. We found a way to, or an opportunity. We found a way to address this that kind of meets the needs in the world, or meets the needs of consumers or of businesses in a way that is replicable, that in a way that can create real value. And that's critical as well. Obviously, without that, there's nothing to scale and there's nothing to grow.
I think it's also, obviously everything you said is exactly what I was thinking. And there's also the side of, it's important for businesses not to lose that as they grow as well, because that's what's made them so successful. And you find in much larger organizations, if they lose that spark, that's when the growth stops and their market share starts to get disrupted by all the others that are coming through. So as you say, it's as important to have that during growth, but then also not to lose that, as otherwise all the work that they've done will sort of become stagnant as such. So obviously you mentioned earlier that I had Chris Stadler on the podcast, and obviously he's an amazing individual, and Tonal are an amazing company, and I know you work with Chris and Ali. So what do you like so much about Tonal specifically, and why is someone like Ali and the rest of the Tonal team so successful in running their business?
Well, first, I want to start with, I have a Tonal here in my,
nice.
my home, and it's an absolutely spectacular product. It is on par with like the iPhone in terms of the impact that it immediately had in my life, in a positive way. I imagine people that are listening remember the first time they got like an iPhone or an amazing smartphone, and just how miraculous the experience of using that was, and what a order of magnitude improvement over anything that at least I had used before. I just remember that feeling of magic, for a piece of like technology to just improve my life and make things so easy and seamless and solve so many challenges in so many ways, like right out of the gate. And so first, I think just it's an exceptional product and experience. And I'm healthier. I think I'm healthier now than I've been in decades, because I have this thing sitting in my home, and I use it just about every day. So foundationally, there's the product. And then, I think Ali, who I've worked with for a long time, from just after they raised the Series A, all the way through to now. So they were, I don't know, small number of people in a small little office in San Francisco. They hadn't launched the product. They were 2 years before product launch. So very, very early stage. And I think a few things that characterize Ali and Tonal as a company, some of the things I already mentioned, just this real commitment to growth and learning, total curiosity, this real kind of mission and values driven approach. Ali is just an incredible human being to start with. He really knows the impact that he wants to have in the world, but does so with an openness to others. There's this real balance, I think, that is important. You need to like be open enough to create a team that is inspired to work with you to create a vision, but also be able to maybe look out a little further than most others to see a version of the world in which, in this case, like technology can support people to be their strongest and inspire people to come along on that journey, to contribute to that journey, and eventually to really like own that journey along. And I think Ali's done an incredible job at that. He's been so committed to like his own personal growth, his own development as a human, as a leader. And I think that trickles down throughout the organization. He has then attracted amazing leaders like Chris around him that have an amazing amount of expertise, that are also committed both to the vision of the impact they want to have on the world, but also the company that they're building, and the impact that they're having for all of the humans that have opted to join them on that journey toward helping people be healthier, be stronger, be more confident, use data and technology in order to like do something that for many people can be really challenging and hard to be consistent with, but ultimately has such a massive impact on our quality of lives, our well-being, our happiness.
And like that, when I was speaking to Chris, I was like, this company is gonna go so far. Like as you say, the product is amazing, but just speaking to individuals like Chris and like Ali, you realize that there is a foundational part of that business that is going to encourage success. And I, for one, cannot wait for them to come to the UK. So obviously we've spoken a lot about success. There's also a flip side to startups, which is that unfortunately a lot of startups do fail nowadays, a large percentage of them. You mentioned some of the key characteristics for success. What are some of the sort of main reasons why so many startups don't succeed nowadays?
Yeah. Well, the first thing I like to offer for all the entrepreneurs or founders or potential founders out there that are listening is some startups are going to fail, right? That's how the game is organized. That's how the game is organized, right? These are big bets. They're made very early, and it's sort of a diversification, like from a macro level, right? There's a lot of investment going into all of these potential areas and businesses that have the potential to be very massive and impactful. Some of those are going to work and some of those aren't going to work. And so I think one of the important mindset elements for a founder or CEO is first to just recognize that that's a possible outcome, and to not see it as just to be able to like look at that in the eye, or look at the reality of the situation of the choice that you're making. And that, I don't know what the stats are now, but something like, I don't know, 10% of companies make it to the Series A that like raise a seed or something like that. You know, there's a big filter, and it gets very small over time. And so this chance that the startup doesn't work is a real chance. And so there's some fundamental pieces around like, you know, product market fit, like what's the problem you're solving? Can you find a market for that product or that service or that experience? So I think there's some fundamental things there that like, hey, if you can never quite find that, then again, you can have the best team and you can have the best mindset. And I think you might be able to find ways to pivot to something else if you have those things, but you can't make something that doesn't actually create value into a successful business just through like your own will or great practices. So that's one. I think when you kind of take a step beyond that into like, how do humans impact the success or failure of an endeavor or a startup, right? Some startups fail, some startups succeed, some startups that look very similar when they start, some fail and some succeed. Like, what's the delta there? And so I think it's really the inverse of some of the things that I mentioned, right? This lack of curiosity, right? This belief that I know better, right, than the potential users or potential customers. I have a vision that's so fixed, right, that I'm not willing to take input, to run experiments, to learn, to shift, to grow. I think could be one thing that can really trip people up. A second is, this ability you mentioned before, this lack of ability to delegate and to scale oneself as a founder or as an early stage leader or as a CEO. If you're not willing to bring in better people, to open up, delegate, to actually take the input from others that may have different perspectives or experiences than you, that can also choke the momentum of a business and take a business that otherwise has a potential path to great success and turn that into one that never met its full potential. I think that certainly can happen. And then another thing that you see a lot when you're in the mud is really like there's a lot of businesses that fail because relationships break down that are critical for success. So that could be co-founder relationships breaking down. That could be relationships between investors, board members, and the founders. It could be relationships with critical team members. It's hard to overestimate how often the relational dynamic ends up creating issues that businesses can't or don't recover from.
It's quite interesting because a lot of what you said as to why businesses fail is decisions that executives will make and how they actually approach. So a lot of it, if you've got the product, as you say, the product market fit is there, it all comes down to the individuals within the business that are going to make it a success or a failure. So no, that's really, really, really interesting. So just before we round up, if you had one piece of advice for anyone listening, so that could be C-levels, employees, or aspiring future CEOs, what would that be? Put you on the spot there.
I like it. And I don't want to just repeat what I said, so I'm going to say it in a slightly different way. I think the greatest skill, one of the greatest skills as a human who wants to feel fulfilled, to achieve their goals, to reach their full potential, is like the willingness to see things as they are, to not either move and kind of resist reality through either looking at the world through this big lens of fear that then makes the world look a certain way, or through like the way we want the world to be, or we want ourselves to be, or we want people to see us and look at things in a certain way. Because that egoic attachment leads to a lot of distortions to reality, and not in like the positive way. They sometimes say CEOs have this distortion field. Like if that's conscious, okay, you can help create a reality that doesn't exist. But I think at the human level, we spend so much time resisting reality, like resisting what is actually true in this moment, versus accepting reality. And then from that place, taking the step forward and moving in the direction we want to move. So that could be looking at ourselves and seeing where we're strong and seeing where maybe we're not so strong, the patterns that we have that contribute to situations in our life that aren't the way that we want them to be. It could be our business and the ways in which it has paths to success, or it could potentially fail, to the people in our lives and how they support us, or how those relationships support us or don't support us, and how we might be able to shift them. it's almost the most fundamental skill. The first thing we need to do in order to like effectively and efficiently change in a way that we want to change, grow in a way we want to grow, achieve the success that we want to achieve, whatever that might be, is to first like engage with reality as it actually is. And if you're able to do that and have this solid ground on which you can stand and off of which you can push to move in the direction you want to go, like that's half the battle, frankly. So many people spend so much time fighting against a reality that they've created in their minds. And so orienting and grounding into like the raw truth as the starting point is something I think everyone could benefit from.
Nice. I don't think there's much else I can add to that. I think that's a great answer. So just to finish off, if anyone wants to find out some more information about yourself or Decode or the companies that you work with, where's the best place for them to do so?
Yeah, you can learn more at decode.coach, where you'll hear a bunch about coaching and the different types of coaching that we offer. You'll also see some videos of customers communicating in their own words about the impact that coaching has had on them and their teams and their businesses.
Nice. I'll leave the link to decode.coach in the description for you as well. So yeah, Dane, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you today. It's been amazing to learn what it takes to be a successful CEO, as well as the key characteristics as to why startups succeed, but also why they maybe sometimes fail, plus so much more. Thank you so much for your time. It's been amazing.
Thank you, Ben. It's been amazing for me as well.
Thanks.